My name is Charles Epting, and you're listening to the Lost Labels Podcast. Today on the Lost Labels Podcast, we are going to be speaking to Jane Ashley, or as I know her, Jane Eyre of Jane Eyre and the Belvederes, who I first discovered through their exceptional 1978 single on Stiff Records called Yankee Wheels, backed with Nasty Nice. This was Stiff by 26, so the 26th 7-inch using their numbering system. And I discovered this album at Generation Records in Greenwich Village, and was very excited to hold it in my hands and to come home and drop it on the turntable. And both songs are great, but the title track, the A side especially, Yankee Wheels, is very moody and emotional and I'd say melodramatic in the best possible way, because this is a song that is, in my opinion, just exceptional and doesn't really sound like anything else Stiff Records was putting out at the time, which I like. It shows how versatile Stiff was. Jane Eyre and the Belvederes released 2 other songs on Stiff Records that only appeared on the 1978 Akron compilation, those being When I Was Young and I'm an Actress. So 4 songs on Stiff Records, Jane Eyre and the Belvederes then leave to go to Virgin Records, release a full-length album, and then a couple of years later, Jane circles back around and releases one final single on Stiff Records as Jane Eyre and the Belvederes. Now, before I speak to Jane, as I have a proclivity of doing, I love going back and finding contemporaneous newspaper articles. So really quick, I'm going to read a little bit from an article called A Not So Plain Jane Prepares for Takeoff that appeared in the Akron Beacon Journal, February 11th, 1979. It begins, Jane Ashley is 22. A former Akron Science Fair winner in math when she was an 8th grader at Litchfield Junior High, a graduate of Firestone High School, and a 2-year veteran of Akron U in marketing. With that kind of background, you know she knows a lot of hometown folks. But if all those friends and neighbors want to keep track of her, they'll need to keep a lookout for the name Jane Eyre. Right this minute, there is no Jane Eyre, no image connected with the name, and no master plan for developing a persona to go with the name. At the moment, Jane Eyre is really not much more than Jane Ashley's photograph and 4 45 RPM record singles titled Yankee Wheels, When I Was Young, I'm an Actress, and Nasty Nice. At the moment, Jane Eyre is a plan on a drawing board. Jane Ashley, like Rachel Sweet, wants to be a star, or at least to have a career as a singer, and she's currently expending a lot of time and energy to attain one or the other of those goals. Skipping ahead to the end of the article, it reads, in Europe, thanks to Stiff Records, which released her singles and which has a strong punk image, Jane Eyre also has a punk rock image. That came about, she says, because Stiff Records sent her for publicity photos to, quote, a photographer who has a certain style. That won't happen again, she says. From now on, the decisions will be hers. What Jane says she wants to do most is sing crossover songs, music that sounds middle of the road to a middle of the roader and punk to a punk. You try to do it without offending anybody. Perhaps you'll find a persona for Jane Eyre, although she says, quote, Jane Eyre will only coalesce as an image when 2 people view it from a distance, whatever that means. Stay tuned, Akron, for Jane Eyre, coming soon to a record store near you. In the meantime, if you run into Jane Ashley, don't feel too intimidated to say hello. I'm really quite normal, says Jane Ashley. I hope that gives just a little bit of an overview of who Jane Ashley / Jane Eyre was in early 1979 when she was just beginning to make a name for herself in the music industry. I think it shows how her hometown of Akron was responding to her newfound success. And with that being said, I'd like to welcome Jane Ashley onto the Lost Labels podcast. Jane, to start things off, let's go back to the beginning. I read in a newspaper article that it was your sister who first encouraged you to start singing and to start performing. Is that true? Can you talk a little bit about those early days of your career?
Well, yes. She was a local singer, and she kept nudging me. I really, as much as I enjoyed music and I would do it, I didn't take it very seriously. And she kind of, she kept pushing me into it. So that's when I started doing a little bit of work with her, and then she joined another band and a few other things. But then I kind of didn't do it at all because I had a boyfriend that didn't think good girls should be in bands. and after we broke up a few years later, I picked up again, and I was working as a waitress at the Armadillo, and Liam Sternberg was a patron there. They would have jazz artists play there, and it was kind of a trendy place to work. And I was going to school, and I was singing along the jukebox, and Liam came up to me and said, "You know what? One of these days I'm going to make a record with you." And I just said, "Oh yeah, right, dude. You know." Anyway, Marty Jones. I don't know if you're familiar with her. You may or may not be. She is another American artist that's really quite well known in the States, and she was doing her own little solo gig there. She couldn't show up one night due to weather, and so I just winged it one night and started singing a cappella to everybody. And Liam had been that night, and that sort of clinched the deal. So it was him that got me started in the sort of new wave thing, and then I went back into music. So that's why I was Jane Eyre. That was my pseudonym, because I was doing disco band on the road after that at the same time. So it was sort of my alter personality, as it were.
It seems to me like there was a lot of camaraderie, a lot of good, positive energy coming out of the Akron musical scene of the mid to late 1970s. It seems like it was much more than just a bunch of bands playing, but it was almost sort of like a family. Is that fair to say?
Very much so. Ralph Carney, wonderful saxophone player that we lost not too long ago. Alan Myers, drummer from Devo, and I were like best buddies in junior high school. And in fact, when Devo were, really popular and I was doing gigs, we could never go to each other's gigs, but Chai Pig, all those people, Hammer DMH, River City Rebels, you name it, we were all doing stuff at the same time. So if you were doing it, you couldn't really go see everybody else, but we were all best buds. Alan and I lived right across the street from each other. And, the Mother's Balls, the Style Brothers, all that is very much intertwined in that Akron scene. And many of us are still close now to this day.
Now, very early on, you appear on the Stiff Akron compilation, which is one of the great documents of that scene. And your first single, Yankee Wheels, was released on Stiff Records in the UK. There's this weird sort of crossover between the Akron sound and the United Kingdom, and I think that a lot of the music sort of took hold over there even more than it did stateside. Can you talk a little bit about how it was that this music was even discovered by Stiff Records in the first place?
Yeah, Liam and Chris Butler was tying in everybody, and because Liam had already spent some time in England, he was the one that was pulling together stuff and taking it back there and, flogging it to get attention and whatnot.
I'm curious about the next steps of your career, because you have a single out on Stiff Records, which is a very hot label at that time. Now you have to start worrying about touring, about recording a follow-up. You go over to England, I know, after the single comes out. Were you able to associate much with the other artists on Stiff Records? Did you become, very much a part of their scene overseas? I'm curious, after the Akron compilation and Yankee Wheels were released, what were the next steps for you?
Ian Dury was one of the first people I met, just in these early days, because every once in a while, when Yankee Wheels came out, it created quite a fuss. And so I'd have to I'd be on the road, and Liam would come, and he'd bring a little, 4-track or 8-track and record vocals there on the road, and then take it back to the studio and work on it with Chris. And occasionally we'd have to do little press releases. So Ian Dury was the first one I met. And I was totally charmed by him. And yes, I was growing more and more understanding of that scene as much as I could, but also, again, I was embroiled in, being on tour at that time with these, 8-piece, 9-piece horn disco show band kind of thing, Golden Age, you name it, as one of the two kind of, chick singers. And actually what happened was I had left one band, and I went, I decided to come home because I decided I wanted to come off the road. I wanted to go back to school. So I reckoned that if I moved to Detroit, I could go to school there, and I would be able to have enough money singing to pay for that, which is what I did. And I did, after a couple of attempts, to hook up with a great band called the Skyline Band. And then 2 weeks after I'm there and all settled, Liam calls me and says, Jane, Virgin Records wants you to come over and do 4 tracks how soon can you get here? I said, geez, I just moved here. I said, well, I kind of give them 2 weeks notice, And so that's what happened. That I went over to Virgin, recorded those 4 songs, and then came back to Akron, and that's when I met Hammer Damage, and really wanted them to be the band to go on tour with me when Virgin picked me up for the album. Virgin wouldn't allow it, and that's how The Edge became the Belvederes for the album for Virgin.
On your early recordings like Yankee Wheels and When I Was Young, are those local Akron musicians playing? Did you have a real backing band at that point? If you recall, who was playing on those early songs?
They were all Akron musicians and kind of spread out amongst the different groups. And some of the tracks I wouldn't see exactly. See, there's all kinds of players who play exactly what part on which song. I can't exactly tell you because I was traveling and I would come in and Liam would have me do my bit. So unfortunately, very seldom was I able to really sit together with the musicians, put down like the guide vocal or any of that stuff. Typically, there was a certain amount of pre-production that had gone in before I was even part of it at that point.
I think it's really interesting. It sounds to me, at least, like you were almost living a sort of double life at this point where you had your mainstream career, so to speak, where you were singing disco songs and performing to audiences, and it was very, run-of-the-mill. But then, in your spare time, you transformed into Jane Eyre and were recording these very dark and sort of avant-garde, I don't want to say punk, but very new wavy songs. Is that a fair way to describe it, this sort of balance between your 2 different styles of music?
I think you're pretty close on the mark with that. It certainly was something that was a little like sideline that a lot, especially like the musicians I was on the road with, they really knew very, very little about it. They would occasionally see Liam show up. We'd be in the hotel room and do a little chorus and be, quick and simple, but they wouldn't have understood it because it was such a different genre of music. And they were kind of, I guess, committed to one type, whereas I was just having fun. Anywho, so yes. And then, but as time grew, and then of course once I went to England, then I became totally enwrapped with it and embraced it.
Did you find that your music as Jane Eyre and the Belvederes was better received overseas than it was in the States?
Oh yes, and it's amazing how what a following that still remains true to on the English side, definitely, and also Australia and Japan were very big markets too, much more so than the States. You couldn't get released in the States unless there was a lot. It was much stricter, so there's a lot of reasons you had to come in as an import, and that meant that it was really costly. So you couldn't sell cheap records or reasonably priced records. So there was some challenges in just getting releases in the States for early days with Stiff Records and Virgin and stuff like that.
What do you remember about the decision to leave Stiff Records before releasing a full length, and to ultimately go with Virgin to release your LP?
I don't know. I imagine that Liam felt that he wasn't getting any bites from Stiff, and Virgin suddenly appeared, and that's when he called and said, "Hey, let's go through 4 songs and over here." And we had done demos. We had met back in Akron and done another set of demos, and based on that was when I left Detroit to go over and record the 4 songs. And then Virgin picked up the album option.
And if I'm not mistaken, after your album for Virgin, you went back to Stiff to do one last single, correct?
Yes, I did. Virgin was just not letting me do anything at that time. I was very frustrated. I was working with some musicians locally in London, and one Paul Cutler, someone I'm still writing with now. We resumed our writing a couple of years ago. And so we wanted to do a project, and they Paul and I managed to get the B-side, but they wouldn't. They wanted to do the cover song, and that's when I Closed My Eyes and Count to 10 came out. Because basically, I just called Dave Robinson and Stiff and said, I want to do a record, Dave. And, and he acquiesced and said, okay, let's do it.
Now, today, you're still very involved in music. Would you mind getting us up to speed? After that the last 7-inch came out on Stiff. What have you been up to in the years since?
Well, I went back to the States in '85 because my sister had cancer. She'd had it for years, and at this point, I had a good enough advisor to say now's the time to go. So I had 6 months with my sister before she passed, and then 6 months with my parents for that healing process, and then I went back to England. And when I did, well, and what I should say is prior to that, my marriage split up with Pete Burkett, and I started working with Mark Nevin of Fairground Attraction, and he ended up doing a lot of work with Kirsten Call, and I had known Kirsten from the get-go, and we have done work together, and we're best mates. And so, anywho, when I came back to the States, when I came back in '86 to London, I hooked up with Eric Robinson and A Good Feeling, and Joe sang, and then later formed a group called the Ghastly Girls, which is the precursor to the Spice Girls. And my name was Scarlett Ferrari, and I spoke with a Southern accent. I also was doing a whole bunch of session work. Erasure, I did the Coca-Cola commercial and the video for Robert Plant, the Lighten Up Baby, a whole Shaken Pyramids, a whole bunch of session work and voiceovers. And then I got another good advisor back on in '80 that my mom was already struggling with cancer at this point, and that something was going to happen with my dad. So I decided to come back to the States because it was just too far away. And sure enough, my dad had a heart attack within a month of me riding back. So at that point, I was spending a good time with my folks during that healing process, and I was preparing and I was saying get up and sing with your local band, but wasn't committed to doing any music at that time. I was planning to move to California. I have 2 girlfriends out there. I'd done work in California. I thought, well, let's go there. I know people there. And instead, met someone, fell in love, got married, went back to school, and worked on academia. So I went and got my bachelor's and my master's degree, and I was teaching at university and working as a paralegal for my brother's law firm, and became a financial consultant. And every once in a while I would do a little bit of music, some writing with Jeff Curtis, but not very much performing. And then I came to Baltimore after my folks had passed, and I came as a financial consultant, looked in the newspaper, and I saw an ad that someone was looking for a singer, and I was still doing my writing and missing writing with Jeff, because Jeff and I would get together every Monday night and work on music. And I met Kevin Robinson, guitar player, and Steve, and I can't think of the last name now, bassist. And Steve led to the Majestic, so I sang with for 13 years. And Kevin is someone I was just working on original music with last night. And Kevin and myself and the Majestics were inducted into the Maryland Entertainment Hall of Fame 2 years ago, May 2 years ago, at the same time. So it was really, really cool journey. And now I've been working for law firms here. I taught English, 9th grade English in Baltimore City schools. That noble experiment didn't work. I went back into the legal secretary field, and now I work for, actually employed by RICO, managed services for Stanley Black & Decker's production and shipping core. And so I handle the shipping, and our team does the rest of our team. It's a 10-person team, and they do all the production of the big signs and all the pamphlets and all that stuff for the whole nation, everybody. It's a totally different line of work for me, and it's like busy, but I like it a lot. And of course, now I'm really concentrating on the music. I've done some fundraisers. I did James Jamboree last Christmas for the Akron Canton Food Bank. I've done James Big Night Out, where I get a whole bunch of musicians who all love playing together and everything, and have been over the years, and putting together the supergroup. So all the people that I've been writing with for all these years, and Paul and I, send we've been using programs over the internet, and just recently approached Kevin, and the timing was just right, because it's so hard for me to try to be the engineer and singer and put down, the voice and all that stuff. So he's helping me out with that, which is good timing, and that's what I'm doing now.
You've been involved in the music industry effectively your whole life. How does it differ when you get on stage to perform today or sit down to write a song today versus, being in Ohio as a young girl going by Jane Eyre at the time? How does it differ this many years later?
Well, first off, when I first started working back in 80, 81 with Paul Cutler to try to write songs, it was really a foreign idea to me. I always liked doing journals and poems and that sort of thing, but never really thought of myself as a songwriter. So it was not something that came easily to me. And it's, it's like anything. It's edit, 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 edit. And sometimes you have to walk away from it and come back to it. I'm a perfectionist. I'm never happy with anything that I do. You know what I mean? But keeping it simple, it has become a lot more enjoyable to me. I think I went through, sometimes I'll talk to people who are songwriters, and they say it always has to come from sad spots. And I think that can be true, but I think you can get around that. And so I've kind of switched my mindset a bit. And I don't know. The thing is, it's just part of you. You have to do it. There's something about it. It's an addiction. There's something, your brain works on a certain level when you're doing music. And once you get to that place, you have to go back to it. And the only way you can do is getting those creative juices flowing again and giving it a go. But there's a lot of just, total writer's block and mental block, and like can't even, think about doing it because oh, and then you have to, and then you just say, okay, that's enough. I really need to get my act together and get back to it. So.
Do you have any reflections looking back at having been part of the Akron sound? This is a very legendary musical scene. Books have been written about it. What are your thoughts in retrospect that you not only got to experience the music, but actually take part in producing the music yourself?
I feel so blessed that to be part of the Akron community and as close as we are. I mean, for instance, Rich Roberts from Shy Pigs got to play with me this benefit that I did in December in Akron, and we had never had a chance to play together. So we're all so close. We all admire each other. Everyone is so talented, and they're special people. They're really good people, smart people, and kind people, and just the fall of the earth. And to be part of that tapestry is a beautiful thing.
Now, this is just my impression. I didn't live through this scene, so I'm maybe speculating a little bit here, but when you look at a lot of the compilations that were put together in the 1970s, trying to capture the punk new wave scene, whether it's the Max's Kansas City compilation or the CBGB's compilation, it seems to me that a lot of times they missed the mark. They didn't capture what they were setting out to capture, maybe because some of the bands were too big or there were, record label contractual obligations. But in my opinion, the Stiff Records Akron compilation, with its scratch and sniff burnt rubber cover, really does an excellent job of capturing what was going on, whether it's you, Jane Eyre, whether it's the Bizarros, Rubber City Rebels, the Embryonic Waitresses, Chai Pig. I think that compilation really is an important historical document that allows me today to experience, what you were experiencing firsthand. It seems to me like they were able to capture on vinyl all of the bands that mattered.
And yeah, who mattered and still matter to each other now, to this day. We just lost George Cabanis a few days ago from Hammer Damage, Cal Mellons, and he's been fighting cancer, and it really did capture the moment then, and it captures that mainstay that keeps us all tight with each other now, which is really wonderful.
I said it earlier, and I know it sounds cliche, but it seems to me like the Akron Sound was really more like a family than anything. I listened to you talk, and I spoke to Nick recently, and I hear about these friendships that were built that have lasted a lifetime.
Oh yeah, yeah, it really is, and it's marvelous because and not only that, but not only with the Akron scene, but when I went to England and all the records and my friends there, we're all John Moss, who was in Culture Club, and all of us, the nucleus of people of us there are all still really tight and close too. So it's really extraordinary. It's an unusual thing to see people that through their lifetimes really hold the same bond, that continuity, that string is still, connected. It's really neat.
Jane, thank you again. This has been a real pleasure speaking to you.
Oh, indeed. And, we love it. When you said, as soon as you said you'd talk to Reckless Eric, I said, okay, I'm in.
Well, I can't wait to get the Eric episodes posted. But before that, next up on Lost Labels podcast, we'll be speaking to Chris Butler, who will round out the trifecta of Akron Sound artists. Chris Butler was a member of Tin Huey, but most famously, he went on to form the Waitresses, who had a lot of success in the early 1980s with their very danceable, very catchy MTV hits. So Chris Butler will be next. That's going to be a two-part interview because he and I had a couple of great lengthy chats about his career. So with that, we will round out the Akron Sound again between Nick Nicholas, Jane Ashley, and Chris Butler. I'm thrilled to be getting so many different viewpoints from this scene that I've just really fallen in love with and really become fascinated by. And after that, we will get into I've been focusing a lot of my efforts on Stiff Records artists. And I've got a great slate of Stiff Records artists lined up for a couple episodes after that. So after Chris Butler, then we're going to move ourselves across the Atlantic and take a deep look at Stiff after having looked at the Akron Sound. As always, thank you for listening. I'm Charles Epting. This is the Lost Labels podcast, and we'll see you real soon.